This is Lab Medicine Rounds, a curated podcast for physicians, laboratory professionals, and students. I'm your host, Justin Kreuter, a transfusion medicine pathologist and assistant professor of laboratory medicine and pathology at Mayo Clinic. Today, we're rounding with Dr. John Sherbeck, an anatomic and clinical pathologist at Trinity Health in Michigan, to talk about attending medical conferences and to do a quick recap of AABB's latest annual meeting. Thanks for joining us today, Dr. Sherbeck.
Thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be here.
Oh, I'm super jazzed to talk with you in this way and reflect on medical conferences. Maybe let's kick off with, from your perspective, why are medical conferences important to attend?
Sure. So to me, I think there's kind of three big reasons. And I think first and foremost, it's to learn new stuff, right? So at most conferences, especially ones that are at the national or international level, a lot of times there's a big trial that's presenting its data as an abstract. It might be the first time some of that data is coming out. So not only is it kind of cool to get that right on the cutting edge, but you often have a chance then to ask questions, to interact directly with people running that trial, people presenting that data. So it's a real way to interface in a way that you couldn't otherwise with people who are frankly really important in your field. As a part of that, then there's often the ability to kind of engage in debate and discussion about some of these, whether new trials, kind of emerging data. You can be part of that conversation, or you can listen in. It's entertaining, if nothing else. And then finally, when it comes to learning new stuff, you can see some cutting edge new things, right? So at AABB, you can see everything from cutting edge basic science to cutting edge big data, clinical usage of that science, right? So lots of new things happening at conferences. I think the next is networking. So it's a great opportunity to see old friends. I can speak for myself. It's a great way to meet new friends like Justin. And what's really fun too is that you can meet people who are like you. They're at your stage in your career, but you can also meet people who are a big deal, who you aspire to be and who can become a mentor, even if kind of casually, so to speak. And then obviously you got to give a shout out to your vendors, see new vendors, find out what's coming on, in the industry standpoint, new technologies. And then I think the third and maybe the most important thing, which I got to do kind of for the first time this past year at AABB, is I've presented posters, presented oral abstracts before, but it's a chance to show off your work, but it's also a chance to do team building, right? So me running a community hospital, it's a teaching hospital, but I don't have residents. I don't have pathology residents. It's an opportunity for my laboratory scientists to get involved in projects, to present their work, because frankly, anyone can present at these sorts of meetings. And if you're lucky as we were to be able to bring your team with you, it's a great way to team build and to make that a routine part of what your laboratory does.
You gave us a lot there to unpack. A couple of things I want to dive in and ask questions about. The first off is when you talk about kind of engaging in debate and kind of the conversation about clinical practice. What was your kind of experience kind of training up to where you can kind of develop that comfort level engaging in these conversations, thinking about our audience who might be students, who might be junior faculty?
Sure. Well, I think part of that starts with, we're talking about a kind of in the frame of AABB and national conference, but to me personally, my journey, it started at regional conferences. So it started at the Michigan Association of Blood Banks and presenting there as a resident. There's often junior techs, laboratory scientists presenting there as well. So being able to get your feet wet in a smaller kind of more regional meeting, it's less intimidating. It's never still easy for someone to start to kind of step up to the microphone if they haven't before. So going through that graduated process. And I think the other thing too is as you attend more and more, you start to realize that, hey, these people are having the same thoughts I have. It doesn't matter that it's a distinguished professor or an SBB reference lab director that's asking the question. I had that same question myself. And so, hey, my thoughts are good. I got some good ideas. I can do this, right? I remember the first time I ever spoke up at a meeting was in 2019 in Boston at AABB. And it was like a nuance about a transfusion reaction situation. And I don't even remember the details, but after I was done, like a few people from the back clapped their hands, and I don't know if they knew me already or if they liked what I had to say, but it can be empowering because when you step up to that microphone, yeah, everyone kind of says who they are, and some people say it really quickly. I'm not sure why, but you're just a human with an idea, with a question, and I think that levels the playing field out. And so it's certainly can be nerve wracking the first few times, but it's it's a come one, come all. Everyone's invited to speak up.
And kind of building off that, you mentioned the last point there about team building as like a big kind of point for attending medical conferences, kind of thinking about maybe our audience that are more experienced faculty. How did you approach kind of prepping your team to present at a national conference? Are there ways that you kind of went about setting them up for success?
Yeah, so I think the first thing was, didn't take long, but kind of sit down. In my case, a 2 years out of school laboratory scientist who's incredibly bright, and kind of sit down and be like, hey, what are some hypothetical questions someone might ask? What are maybe some questions that I have for the next phase of this study if we were to go on and pursue it? So kind of mocking up some of those questions, drilling through them, anticipating, and then helping to make sure that you're on the same page with your answers. I think in this nuanced setting or this specific setting of being a poster presenter, making sure you're also available during the poster session, making sure you're not totally wandering off the entire time. So that's the main things. I think just in general, reassuring people and making them not even so much with your words, but with the way that you're bringing them into this conference to begin with, right? You're telling them that you're an important person. You're a important member of this team who did important work. Like you belong here. And if people have that sense of belonging, like they're not having imposter syndrome during their presentation, that also goes really a long way. Because I think sometimes people get really nervous about saying, I don't know, right? Especially in these sorts of settings. I don't know. And it's always a great way to kind of be open up to new ideas. What is that next step going to be in your project? What's the next project you could do that's unrelated, coming from someone's question that you don't have an answer to? So, yeah.
Awesome. Now let's dive into some. I'm curious about a couple of your takeaways from the annual meeting, which gets into maybe a little bit of the what do you know now?
Yeah. So three big takeaways. So specifically, in the world of transfusion medicine, things are changing and they're changing fast. And we've thrown around phrases like "what's old is new again," and for a while. And I think we're going to get whiplash. Not to get into the weeds too much, but we saw some recent trial data come out and some heated discussion. From what I heard, I haven't been able to listen to the recordings yet because I was still traveling, but some heated discussions on transfusion thresholds, where maybe a restrictive threshold in certain patient populations isn't non-inferior. So we've been kind of moving to this world where, not only do we know that in most patient populations, a restrictive transfusion is as good as a liberal one, we started to get some hints that maybe no, it's better. And then we started to drill down into these like nuanced situations, like people with a head bleed on a Tuesday who like cabbage, they need a hemoglobin less than 7. They'll be okay, right? And so I think some whiplash is coming in kind of the trends of how we practice medicine. I think the second take home is that the world can be a scary place and we have to be prepared for it. So there was a lot on disaster planning, on cyber attacks, a great talk about massive transfusion in the rural setting, and freak everyone out by saying these words, but how a hospital could think about making a walking blood bank for an emergency situation. So I think preparedness is a big deal. The fact that we had a major blood center in the Southeast Michigan get hit by a cyber attack, and then ongoing hurricanes and supply chain distributions, I think it's something we're really taking to heart that has to be prepared for. So I think that was a big takeaway. The last one, and to me, the most important lesson I had, not even necessarily related to our practice of transfusion medicine, but Dr. Yvette Miller and Dr. Hasper gave an absolutely just powerful talk on the history of blood donation, race, and transfusion medicine. um, really touched on the impact that our field has on society as a whole and how it extends just beyond getting blood from one person into a patient into another person. So I think there's a lot we can learn from their discussions that they had. And if anyone has the ability to ever see Dr. Miller speak on that topic, absolutely incredibly powerful. Highly encourage it.
I'd second that. I've seen a number of her presentations over the years that have always focused on a very kind of key component of the blood supply that we have, whether it's safety, availability. She's really always kind of been on the cusp of some very important topics. So, how did you go about planning your time? You took a lot away from the conference, and I think what's kind of fun about these conversations is kind of taking stock and really of all that you did accomplish during your time. How do you go about when you're going to attend a conference, plan out your time? How do you approach that?
Sure. So I think we're really fortunate to live in an era where a lot of organizations have apps, right? So AABB in particular has a great app for every meeting, and so a couple weeks before they'll publish out the entire schedule, and you can look at it by day, by speaker, and I know a lot of other large organizations do the same thing. So you can kind of go through and set your schedule out. It'll like link it right to your phone. It'll say, hey, you're supposed to be in room, ballroom 4 for this big discussion on red cell transfusion guidelines. So I like to say, I told my team, like, plan on the plane, right? So have an idea. We know, when you're going to be landing. Hopefully, roughly when you're going to get to the conference, when you're going to be leaving. So make a note of everything that you want to see, that you want to be able to get to see in person. I think if you look at smaller meetings, oftentimes you don't have the same options, that probably don't have an app to begin with, and you might just have one set curricula that everyone's going to attend. But take advantage of those resources. I think the other thing that's useful to do is to look at past meeting schedules, if it's a meeting you've never been to get a better sense of kind of, hey, if the opening ceremony, so to speak, is Saturday afternoon, well, what's the meeting like Saturday morning? Are there usually talks you might want to go to on that early Saturday morning? So that might make you want to adjust your travel plans. I think once you select talks that you want to go to, you got to be kind of firm with yourself. Like, hey, I know that museum down the street looks really sweet. Maybe I could skip out and go there at 3 p.m. But I think there's always time for that, and it's useful to remember why you're there. But I say, while you should be firm with yourself, you also have to go with the flow. I think every single AABB meeting I've been to, I've set my schedule up. I know what I'm going to go to, hanging out, having some coffee between talks, and someone says, hey, I'm going to go to this really interesting talk on X, Y, and Z. And it's like, I didn't see that. Shoot, maybe I want to go to that. And so, go with the flow. See if you hear something that you didn't fully understand, there might be some great topics that you would otherwise miss. Take advantage of if the organization offers like a recording where you can go back later and view some of the talks. AABB does that for an added fee, but you can get CME. Take advantage of that. I already have those bookmarked too, the ones that I need to go back and watch because either I knew I wanted to, or because people said, hey, this was really sweet, you really got to check it out. I think it's really important, especially if you're going with the team, to do your planning about that city ahead of time. Not just about, are you going to Uber, or are you going to take a bus or a subway? But like, find a cool restaurant to check out, enjoy some of the city as well. Because we're here to get, to learn a lot, to meet each other, to kind of do a lot in our field, but it goes a long way to, go have a meal together outside of things, talk about your work, but also talk about life, get to know people better. I think that gets back to the teamwork and team building, but it's a lot of fun.
Right on. I think that's another theme through this podcast is this concept of well-being and how are we fostering that. And you're giving us a good sense for that. How do you approach like networking? You mentioned networking as a key part of going to attend a conference. Is this something that you're looking at ahead of time and reaching out to people, or just to yourself, I'm going to try to meet up with person X, Y, and Z?
So I think, if you look at it from the perspective of someone starting new, a lot of conferences will have like a new first time attendee lunch. So I would always encourage people to go to that. The food's usually pretty good. and you get to meet people who are similarly in your shoes. Maybe you traveled with some people from your institution, but there's a good chance you didn't. So that's a great place to start. That's how I kind of met some of my first friends in transfusion medicine, was attending that lunch. I think the poster sessions are like the curated poster sessions while the speaker or presenters are next to the poster is also a great opportunity. You see something that looks cool, start to talk to them. Um, I have a couple of good friends who I love seeing in AABB most years, who that's how I met them. And then I think other than that, it really comes down to just kind of being open to opportunities to meet people. There's a lot of time where people are just standing around mingling. Go say hi to someone. Um, I think it's a lot of us, myself included. Like I'm an extroverted introvert, so like I love to talk to people. I'm energetic, and then I go home and I'm just like exhausted, right? So I think that's a time where you really kind of kick off your shoes and try to meet people. Um, uh, yeah.
One of the things that I really struggled with as I was kind of getting into my role as a physician was understanding how should I approach vendors, right? Because like you're in training in medical school and kind of you're kind of taught like, oh, you have to be very careful, you're not gonna, pick up a pen from the vendor and you're kind of really thoughtful on kind of ethics from that standpoint. But then also I've seen, as I've gotten into practice, it's really important to know like what is the vendor coming out with, or what are they innovating on, or in some cases just who might be some alternative vendors out there when you go looking to update such a system. So I'm kind of curious, like what's your current practice for how do you kind of go through those vendor halls? Wait,
That's
I'm
a
sorry. That's the wrong word, vendor halls. What is it? I'm asking you about what's it like to go through the main event with all the vendors.
Sure. So, I shared that kind of what am I supposed to do, kind of starting out, right? And you don't know anyone. And I think that the experience with vendors is actually very similar to the experience with the meeting as a whole. So the more times, if you're able to go multiple times, obviously, the more times you go, kind of becomes old hat. And so things that might seem, hey, what am I supposed to do? What am I doing here? You just kind of figure it out. So my approach as a laboratory medical director with vendors, I will usually go and stop by all of my main vendors, um, just to say hi, to thank them, see if they have anything new they want to show me. We're thinking about partnering with actually one of our vendors on some quality studies related to some reagents. And so it was cool to bounce ideas back off of them, hear what they had to say about things that we've already sent them on that project idea. And frankly, the reality is like they're people, right? So yes, they're salespeople. And if you walk up to a vendor you have no relationship with, like you can just ask them like, hey, show me something cool. And they'll show you something cool, right? And they'll talk you through it. And they'll give you opportunities to ask questions. I mean, that's the one thing that took me a while to learn is like they're here to kind of chat with you. And they frankly realize they're not gonna like make a sale, right? They're not gonna change anyone's world at that time. It's just about connecting with people. And so I think for me, the big thing is just being open. Just walk up and say hi. There's often lots of gifts that are considered appropriate. Like I know every year there's one blood supplier who always gives out socks with their logo on, that are always like a super huge hit. So rather than just like sneaking up there and kind of grabbing one and running away, just say, hey, introduce yourself and ask them, what's new in your world, what's going on, what should I be excited about? Um, and just remember they're just people.
Yeah, no, wise words, and actually something I'm going to take home from this conversation. That brings us to the last question I'd like to close with, which is, a lot of times we go to these meetings, we learn amazing stuff, and then we come back and we're back in the routine or the grind, and how quickly we sometimes can forget some of the really interesting work that's being done in our community. And so, my last question is really, how do you capture your conference learning?
That's a great question. I think this really is the crux of it, right? Because we want to take home something. hopefully more than just something. So I will still sometimes take notes, usually on like the notes function on my phone or on my iPad. At AABB again this year, they had presentations had slides available ahead of time, and you could take notes directly on them. So that was useful. More organizations are going to that sort of model. So take notes on paper, on an app. If you are inclined, and it's actually how I got a lot of my start getting to know people in transfusion medicine, is jump onto social media, onto Twitter, X, or LinkedIn, what have you, and talk about something cool that you saw, because there's an engaged audience out there who wants to hear from you. I think the next kind of logical step is talk with people who were there, talk with people who were in the room that just saw the same thing you did, or who saw something different, who's in the room next door that you know. So this is where, if you are traveling with a team, it's a cool way to kind of debrief and give each other the kind of the 3 bullet points of what that talk was about and what you can take home from it. And then I think probably the most important thing, so for me, running a community hospital lab, I don't have the resources to like bring everyone to AABB every year, right? I mean, no one has the ability to do that. Someone's got to stay home and keep the lights on. But what I think is the crucial part, especially when we're talking about that bridge between physicians, laboratory scientists, administrators, is making sure everyone realizes they have value and that they're a part of a team together. And so debriefing your team on what you saw, I think, is absolutely huge. I will talk at length, probably far longer than they want me to, like at our huddles, like the week after, being like, all right, I want to talk about this really cool, like esoteric mouse model for like anti-human B that was presented. And like, it's really cool. And everyone's like, can we talk about the instrument analyzer that's broken and we need to get the repairs done, right? Like, but I think there's so much value in keeping everyone connected. It helps keep people engaged, and then whatever pathway you have to kind of maybe getting that next person down the line to come to the meeting next year, whether that's getting them involved in a project, if you don't have the resources, getting them to decide, hey, I'm going to pay my own way, what have you, that inspires them and makes them want to be a part of that as well. And I think even if it takes time for them to get to that phase in their career, or even if they never make it to that meeting, maybe they can make it to a smaller regional meeting. I think all of that goes a long way into keeping people engaged in their work beyond just kind of the day-to-day, algorithms and operations that we have in our laboratories.
We've been rounding with Dr. John Sherbeck, talking about how to make the most from attending medical conferences. Thanks for taking the time to talk about this, Dr. Sherbeck.
Oh, I thank you so much for having me. This has been an absolute blast.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us today. We invite you to share your thoughts and suggestions via email to mcleducation@mayo.edu. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe. And until our next rounds together, we encourage you to continue to connect lab medicine and the clinical practice through educational conversations.